Welcome to Rain Narrator channel where we take you on a journey of deep relaxation and complete tranquility with the sound of raindrops adding an atmosphere of tranquility and comfort. Relax, enjoy, and prepare to enter the world of dreams. If you are looking for an ideal way to relax or calm your mind before sleep, you are in the right place. Follow us to get the best stories. I had loved her for so long, longer than I care to admit, but I guess that's the way it is when your heart chooses someone before your mind even understands what's happening. I remember the first time I saw her laugh, the way she'd tilt her head when she was thinking, the way her eyes would light up whenever she spoke about something she loved. It was as if the world around her faded and nothing existed but her. I could never get enough of her. Every time she smiled, my heart beat a little faster, but I always kept my distance, too shy, too unsure of what she could ever see in someone like me. Years passed and our paths crossed often. We'd talk, share stories, and laugh. I was always there, ready to be her friend, her confidant, but never more. Maybe that was my mistake, always settling for second place, hiding behind the just friends mask. I thought maybe if I waited long enough, she'd notice me in the way I noticed her. Maybe one day she'd see what I felt and feel the same way. But no, that never happened. She was always so kind to me, always laughing at my jokes, but never in a way that made me think she saw me the way I saw her. The longer I waited, the more I started to wonder if I was just fooling myself. I could feel the growing ache in my chest every time I watched her with other people, and I knew it was something I couldn't ignore anymore. I was either going to face the truth or keep drowning in this silent longing that only tore me apart more each day. Then it happened. It wasn't anything huge, just a casual conversation. One of those nights when we were both sitting at a cafe, both in the middle of some deep discussion. She was talking about her plans for the weekend, the things she was excited about, and then she said something that hit me like a wave, knocking the breath out of my lungs. "I'm so happy he's coming into town this weekend. It's been so long since we've had time together." I didn't even need to ask who she meant. I could see it in her face, the sparkle in her eyes as she spoke of him. And there it was, the truth I had always avoided facing. The one I had hoped wasn't true. She wasn't talking about me. She was talking about someone else. Someone she loved. Someone who wasn't me. I felt my heart drop into my stomach, a coldness spreading through my chest. It was as if the world had tilted slightly off its axis. All this time I had been here, silently in love with her, and she had someone else. Someone who had been holding her heart all along. I tried to smile, to keep my face neutral, but I'm sure she saw through it. She always did. The way her eyes softened, the way she paused before speaking again, made me realize she knew. She knew I'd always been there, just waiting for the smallest crack in the wall, hoping for a chance to step through. But it wasn't meant to be. Not this time, not ever. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I didn't answer right away. What could I say? How could I explain the ache in my chest? The realization that everything I had hoped for had been a fantasy. A wish that would never come true. "I'm fine," I finally managed to say, though the words felt foreign. Just a little tired." She didn't press it further, but the silence between us felt heavier than it ever had before. I wanted to tell her then. Tell her everything I had kept inside for all this time. But I couldn't, not now. Not when I knew she had already given her heart to someone else. I didn't want to be selfish. Didn't want to risk ruining the friendship we had, even if it was all I had left. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, me nodding and smiling as she talked about her life, her plans, and him. Her happiness was like a cruel reminder of everything I couldn't have. I could tell she didn't notice the growing distance between us. She was too wrapped up in her world, the one I would never be a part of. I left that evening with a heavy heart, the sound of her laughter still echoing in my ears, a reminder of everything I'd never be. It wasn't anger that filled me. No, it was just an overwhelming sense of sorrow. I had loved her for so long, but I had never even crossed her mind in that way. I had been living in the shadows of something that would never exist. Days passed and we continued to see each other, though it felt different. I was different. Every time I saw her, I tried to pretend that nothing had changed, but it had. The illusion I'd been living in for so long had shattered, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken heart. I kept telling myself to move on, to let go. But how do you let go of something that's been a part of you for so long? How do you forget someone who's been a constant in your life? even if they never knew how much they meant to you? One night, a few weeks later, we were at a mutual friend's party. I wasn't expecting much, just a night of mingling and pretending everything was okay. But then I saw them, her and him together. She was laughing, holding his hand, the way couples do when they're in love. And there it was, the final blow. I had spent so many years hoping for something that could never be. I had spent so many nights imagining a future that didn't exist. Watching them together felt like a sharp reminder that I had always been a shadow in her life, a background figure in a story that wasn't mine. I stood there, frozen for a moment before turning and walking away. It wasn't a dramatic exit, no tears, no grand speeches, just a quiet, painful retreat into the night. I didn't want her to see me broken, not like that. But as I walked away, a part of me knew that this was the end of something I'd held on to for far too long. It was time to let go, to stop pretending that I could somehow fit into her world. And so I did, slowly, gradually. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But I learned that sometimes you have to love someone from a distance, even if they don't love you back. You have to let them go, even if your heart is still clinging to the hope that one day they'll see you the way you see them. I don't regret loving her. I don't regret any of it. But now I know that sometimes the hardest thing is not letting go, but realizing that the love you've been holding onto was never meant to be yours. And that's something you have to accept. I've known Mia my whole life. We grew up in the same neighborhood, played in the same parks, went to the same school. There wasn't a day I could remember without her in it. From the time we were little, there was this bond between us that felt almost unspoken but so real. I could always tell what she was thinking, and she knew the same about me. The way we laughed together, the way we argued, the way we dreamed about the future, and when we were a team. It wasn't a question of if we'd end up together. It was always a matter of when. I thought everyone could see it, that there was no chance of it not happening. I loved her more than I knew how to say, but somehow I didn't need to say it, not in the way other people might. With Mia, it was enough just to be with her, to share the same space, the same moments. I could feel her heartbeat in sync with mine. That's how close we were. We'd spent our teenage years together, the awkwardness of growing up only bringing us closer. There were times when I couldn't help but think we were meant to be. Everyone else seemed to think the same. They'd often tease us, joking that one day we'd be married, and we'd laugh, always brushing it off with the same shy smile, the same glint in our eyes. But even in those moments, I knew it was true. There was something unspoken that just felt like destiny. Then came the summer after we both graduated high school. Mia got a job at a local marketing firm. It was exciting, and I could tell she was thrilled about the opportunity. But I didn't realize how much it would change things. She'd come home at night talking about the projects she was working on, about the people she was meeting. I was happy for her, of course, but I didn't quite understand why it bothered me when she started talking about one person in particular, a guy named Alex. He was older, charismatic, successful. They'd work late together, brainstorming ideas, and she'd talk about how much she admired his experience, how much she respected his passion for the work. At first, I brushed it off. Mia was just being her usual self, friendly, social, always eager to learn. But then something started to shift. She seemed different, and not just in the way she spoke about Alex, but in the way she started to carry herself. There was a certain energy about her, an excitement that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't that she was distant or anything. It wasn't that obvious. But I could feel it deep down. It was like she was slipping away from me in slow motion, and I couldn't do a thing to stop it. It started with small things. She'd cancel plans with me to hang out with her coworkers. She'd come over less often, always with an excuse, always busy with work. I tried not to make a big deal of it. I told myself it was just a phase. She was figuring things out. Maybe I was being possessive or needy. But the truth is, it hurt. It hurt in ways I didn't know how to express. I couldn't put it into words without sounding like I was overreacting, but I knew something was happening. I felt it in the space between us. One evening, I went over to her apartment. I had been looking forward to it all week. We hadn't spent much time together, and I missed her. But when I arrived, she wasn't alone. There was Alex sitting on the couch laughing with her. They were so comfortable together, so at ease. Mia looked at me, and I could see something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. It was like she was happy to see me, but she was also distant. And when she introduced me to Alex, there was this nervous excitement in her voice, like she was proud of him, proud of their connection. I didn't stay long that night. I left with a knot in my stomach, the feeling of something slipping away from me, something I couldn't control. The next few weeks were even worse. Mia became more distant, and I started noticing the way she would light up when she talked about Alex, the way she'd check her phone and smile when he texted. I couldn't ignore it anymore. She was falling for him. She was falling in love with someone else. I couldn't bring myself to confront her about it. I didn't want to be the guy who held her back, but the pain was overwhelming. Every time I saw them together, every time she laughed at something he said or shared something new about him, it felt like a knife to my heart. She was my best friend, the person I thought I would spend my life with, and now she was slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Then one night she called me. She sounded different, hesitant. My heart raced as I picked up the phone. "Hey," she said softly. "Can we talk?" I knew what was coming. I knew it, but I didn't want to accept it. "Mia, I think I know what this is about," I said, my voice trembling. "You've found someone else, haven't you?" There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, but no words came. I felt a lump form in my throat, and I hated myself for feeling so weak. "I'm so sorry," she finally whispered. "I never meant for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." My heart shattered in that moment. She didn't want to hurt me, but it didn't change what had happened. She was in love with someone else, and I wasn't the one who had her heart anymore. "I get it, Mia," I said, my voice low. "I do, but I need some time. I need to figure things out. I'll always care about you, but I can't keep pretending like everything's okay when I know it's not." She cried, and it broke me even more. But we both knew that things were different now. She had chosen someone else, and I had to learn to live with it. It's been months since that conversation, and things have changed between us. Mia and I aren't as close as we once were. I see her sometimes, usually when she's with Alex, and it's not as painful anymore. I've come to accept it. She's happy, and that's what matters. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet and I let myself remember, I still think about the way things were. I still wonder what could have been. And I know deep down, no matter where life takes us, I'll always love Mia. It was always clear to me that we were meant to be together. From the moment I first saw her, there was a quiet connection between us, like the world had somehow stitched our fates together. Her name was Clara, and she had been my best friend for as long as I could remember. We grew up together, playing in the fields behind our small town, sharing our dreams and laughing until our stomachs hurt. I never saw it coming, but somewhere along the way, I started to see her as more than just a friend. I remember the first time I realized I loved her. It wasn't a dramatic moment or a thunderous epiphany. It was just one of those quiet realizations that build up over time. One evening, as we sat on the edge of a quiet lake, the sun sinking into the horizon, I found myself watching her with a kind of intensity that I hadn't before. She was telling me some silly story, but I couldn't stop thinking about how perfect she looked, the way the fading sunlight danced in her hair, and the softness in her voice. "You're always going to be my best friend, right?" she asked, a teasing smile on her face. "I hope so," I said, but in my heart I was screaming. I want to be so much more than that, but I couldn't say it. I was too scared. What if I ruined what we had? What if after everything she didn't feel the same? But as time passed, my feelings only grew. I began to notice little things that made my heart skip. How her eyes sparkled when she laughed, the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the way I couldn't focus on anything when she was near. I thought she must feel the same. She was always so kind, always so warm, always there for me when I needed her. But then things started to change. It started subtly at first. She was spending more time with other people, chatting with new friends who had come to town. I tried not to let it bother me, but deep down it did. The nights we once spent talking until dawn became fewer and fewer. The laughter that used to fill our conversations grew quieter, like it was being replaced by something I couldn't quite place. And then there was him. His name was Lucas. He was new in town, a bit older than us, and had a charm that immediately captured everyone's attention. It wasn't just his smile, which could melt anyone's heart, or his easy laugh. No, it was something else, something that I couldn't quite define. But I could feel it. It was like he had this magnetic pull, He wasn't like me. He came from money, from a world I didn't know, and suddenly, Clara was drawn to him like a moth to a flame. I noticed it one evening at the annual town fair. I had just finished helping my father with the food stall when I saw her talking to him. They were laughing, too close for comfort. She had that look on her face, the one I used to see when we were younger, when she was happy, when she was with me. Only now it wasn't me making her smile like that. It was Lucas, and I could tell she was enchanted. At first I told myself it was nothing. It was just a new friendship, a new person in town. But day after day it became more. Clara started spending more time with Lucas, and every time I saw them together, a sharp ache grew in my chest. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it didn't matter, but it did. It really did. Then one day, I overheard a conversation between Clara and her best friend. Amy, they were sitting in the park, laughing and talking, but I caught a few words. I think I might be falling for him, Clara said. He's so different, you know? He's got this lifestyle, this confidence, and he's rich. He has everything, Clara, everything I've ever wanted. I could feel the earth shift beneath me as those words hit my ears. It was like the ground had been ripped away, and I was left standing on a precipice, unsure of how I had ended up here. She didn't say it, but I knew what she meant. She was falling for him, the rich guy who could offer her everything I couldn't. And as much as it hurt, I couldn't blame her. I wasn't rich. I wasn't anything special. I was just a young man with a heart full of love, a heart full of dreams that I couldn't give her. I worked on my father's farm, lived a simple life, and every day, I worried about making ends meet. But that wasn't the world she wanted anymore. I thought I could keep fighting. I thought that if I was patient, if I just kept showing up, things would return to the way they were. But Clara had changed. She no longer sought comfort in the simplicity of our old town life. She had dreams of grander things, things I couldn't offer. The worst part? She didn't tell me directly. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder than words ever could. She became distant, colder even when we did talk. Her eyes didn't sparkle the way they used to when she looked at me. Instead, they were clouded with something else, something I didn't understand. And when I asked her what was wrong, she'd brush it off, say it was nothing, that everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. I could see it in her eyes. She had fallen for Lucas, and that was something I couldn't change. One evening, as the sun was setting, I walked by the lake, the same lake where we used to sit and talk for hours. And there she was, Clara, sitting there, looking out at the water, a soft smile on her face. She looked so peaceful, so happy. And I knew it then, she wasn't mine anymore. Clara, I called, my voice low. She turned to face me, her eyes lighting up for a brief second before she quickly masked it with a polite smile. Hey, Lucas, she greeted me, using his name, not mine. A simple slip, but it hit harder than any confession ever could. I started, but the words stuck in my throat. What was there to say? How could I ask her not to fall for someone else, when it was clear she had already made her choice? I just wanted to say, I hope you're happy, I finally managed to say. The words tasting bitter on my tongue. I really do. She nodded, the smile still in place, though it was a little sad. I am, Lucas, I think I am. I'm sorry. And with that, she turned back to the water, her back to me now, the distance between us more palpable than ever. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of her words settling on my shoulders. It was over. Clara had found someone else, someone who could give her everything she wanted, someone who wasn't me. And as I walked away, I realized that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the heart can give everything it has, but the world has a way of leading people down different paths, paths that we can't follow no matter how hard we try. It all began so simply. I never expected it to turn into something more, but I guess that's how these things go when you least expect it. I met her at a cafe one rainy afternoon. I was there to grab a coffee before heading home from work, trying to drown out the stress of the day. I didn't even notice her at first, but when she ordered the same drink as me, I couldn't help but smile. I offered to pay for her coffee, just a polite gesture, nothing more. But she laughed, a soft, genuine laugh that made me feel comfortable right away. Her name was Emily. We talked a little, nothing deep at first. She was charming, funny, the kind of person who made the world feel a little lighter. She was easy to be around, and I felt like I could talk to her about anything. By the end of our brief encounter, she gave me her number with a wink. I didn't think much of it, but then the text started. It was innocent at first, just small talk, the occasional question about how my day went. I liked it, the little moments of connection. It felt nice to talk to someone who actually seemed interested. After a few days, we met again, this time at a park. We walked around, talked about everything and nothing, our conversation flowing without any effort. I found myself looking forward to seeing her again, to feeling the warmth of her presence. There was a simplicity to it, a quiet comfort I hadn't known in a long time. Our relationship grew from there, slowly but surely. We started spending more time together. Dinner at a local restaurant, walks around the city, late-night phone calls that would last for hours. I didn't know how or when it happened, but I was falling for her. I wasn't in love with her yet, but I was getting there. It felt like we were building something special, something real. And then one day she told me she had to leave town for a few days for work. It was nothing unusual, just a quick trip for a project, she said. I wished her luck, told her to have a safe trip. I didn't think much of it. But the days that followed felt different. She wasn't texting as much. When she did, the conversations felt forced, distant. I tried not to think too much of it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. When she returned, things didn't get back to normal. She was still distant, and I noticed she was always busy, always working or meeting up with friends. I started asking questions, trying to understand why she was acting different, but she always had a reason, a justification. But then one evening, everything changed. I went to her apartment, planning to surprise her with dinner. I had a bottle of wine, her favorite, and a smile on my face. I knocked, but there was no answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I texted her, but no reply. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the unease growing inside me. That's when I heard voices inside, low, quiet, but unmistakable. My heart dropped. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore what I was hearing. I turned the doorknob, and to my horror, the door was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, my pulse racing, and there she was, Emily, but she wasn't alone. She was with someone else, a man. They were laughing, sitting too close, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that made my stomach churn. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. She looked up, her eyes widening when she saw me. But she didn't look ashamed. She didn't look guilty. She looked surprised, like I was the one who was intruding. "John, I didn't expect you," she said, her voice faltering for a second. My world felt like it was crashing down around me. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just turned and walked out, my hands shaking. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't understand how she could do this to me. The next few days were a blur. She called, sent texts, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I didn't want to hear her try to explain it away. Eventually, I gave in. I agreed to meet her, but I was done. I had already seen enough. She apologized, of course, said it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But I knew better. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't sorry. Not really. "You don't understand, John," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "It's just that you weren't giving me what I needed. I was lonely, and he was there. Lonely. That word echoed in my mind. It made me feel small, like I wasn't enough. And in a way, maybe I wasn't. Maybe I had been so wrapped up in myself, so caught up in the illusion of our relationship, that I missed the signs. But that wasn't the real betrayal. The real betrayal was that she didn't even respect me enough to be honest with me. She didn't trust me enough to tell me how she was feeling. I left her then, right there in that cafe where we first met. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just walked away. It was over. But the hardest part? The hardest part was how much I still missed her. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to forget her, to erase her from my mind. But that was the problem with love. It wasn't something you could just turn off. Even after everything, I still found myself thinking about her, wondering what could have been. Even though I knew deep down that it was never going to be the same again, it took time to heal, to come to terms with what had happened. But in the end, I learned something about myself. I learned that love, even the deepest kind, isn't always enough if it isn't mutual. And sometimes, no matter how hard you try, people don't always value you the way you deserve. But I also learned that I deserved better. And I knew that eventually, I would find someone who wouldn't play with my feelings. Someone who would love me the way I loved them, Maybe one day I'd be ready for that kind of love again. It's funny how life works sometimes. You spend months, even years, building something you believe is so real, so untouchable. But then in a single moment, everything crumbles and you're left questioning what was ever true. Her name was Emily, and we met at a cafe in the middle of a storm. I can still remember it so clearly. The way the rain was beating against the windows, the smell of wet pavement outside, and there she was, sitting in the corner, her coffee cup trembling slightly in her hands. She looked lost in thought. Her dark hair framing her face like she was a character straight out of a painting. I don't know what made me go up to her that day, but I did. Something about her called to me. Maybe it was the solitude in her eyes. We started talking. Nothing heavy at first. Just small talk, the kind you share with strangers in passing. But there was an undeniable spark, as if we were two people waiting to meet and fate had just nudged us together. She smiled at me and I knew right then that I'd never be the same. We started seeing each other more often. At first I was cautious. I had been burned before. Love wasn't something I'd ever been great at. But with Emily, I found myself surrendering to something I thought I'd given up on. She was different. She made me feel like I could be the person I always wanted to be. Brave, open, unafraid to show who I really was. She was my muse, my best friend, and in a way, my heart. The first year together was incredible. We spent countless nights under the stars, shared our dreams and fears, laughed over the silliest things. She had this way of making the simplest moments feel extraordinary. And for the first time in my life, I thought, maybe I was lucky. Maybe I was finally in something real. But then something changed. I started noticing little things at first. The way she seemed distracted when I was talking to her. How sometimes her eyes would wander, not like they used to, but like she was searching for something, someone else. And there were those phone calls. Her old friend Jake, I never thought much of it at first. He'd been in her life before I came along, but I always felt like I was second in line, and I hated it. Every time he called, she would light up. It was like a switch flipped in her, and I was just standing there invisible. But she would always reassure me, telling me not to worry, that he was just a friend, that I had nothing to fear. But I did fear it. I feared that one day I'd be the one left behind, that Jake was the one she couldn't let go of, the one who knew her before me. I tried to push the thought away, tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, but deep down I knew something was wrong. The turning point came on the night of our anniversary. We were celebrating a year together at the same cafe where we first met. I had planned everything. I thought it would be perfect. But as the night went on, something felt off. Emily was distant, her eyes darting around, checking her phone more than she ever had before. I felt that familiar pang in my chest, that gnawing feeling of being overshadowed, of being less important than I knew I should be. After dinner, I asked her what was wrong. I thought we could talk, get it all out in the open and work through it. But instead, she just smiled faintly and that was it. She didn't want to talk. I could see her withdrawing, shutting down. It was like I was losing her right in front of my eyes, but I couldn't stop it. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and told me she needed to go. She was tired, she said, and needed some space. I couldn't understand it. We had been happy, or so I thought. The next few days were torture. Emily became more distant with every passing hour. Her texts were short, her phone calls even shorter. Every time I tried to reach out, it was like she was slipping further and further away. And then came the phone call that shattered everything. She told me that she couldn't be with me anymore, that she needed to figure things out, that there were unresolved feelings from her past that she couldn't ignore. And in that moment, I knew Jake. She told me she loved me, that she had loved me, but she couldn't give up the connection she had with him. He was someone she had known for years, someone who had always been there for her, and in the end, she realized that she couldn't let him go. I was devastated. I wanted to scream, to fight for us, but I couldn't. She had made up her mind. I don't know when she started loving him again. Maybe it was after all those long nights they spent talking. Maybe it was during one of those late-night phone calls when I was on the other side of the city, trying to trust her. But what hurt the most was that all along, I had been the fool. She hadn't been choosing between me and him. She had already chosen him. I was just a placeholder in her life. The boy she spent a year with but never really loved enough to let go of the past. I tried to move on, tried to erase her from my mind, but it wasn't that easy. She had been my world for so long, and now she was gone. Not just physically, but in a way that I couldn't fix. The betrayal wasn't just in her choosing him over me. It was in the way she had made me believe we were building something solid when, in reality, I was always the second choice. Always waiting for her to remember where her heart truly belonged. I remember the first time I saw her. It was one of those lazy summer afternoons, the kind that makes you want to run outside and just feel the heat of the sun on your face. I was probably about 6 and she was about the same age. Her name was Emily. She had this bright, almost impossibly bright smile, and her brown hair bounced in wild curls every time she ran. I had never met anyone who seemed so full of life. We were neighbors, growing up on the same street in a small town where everyone knew everyone. We played together every chance we got, hide and seek, kickball, tag. Those simple games, those innocent moments. We didn't even need to say much to each other. The connection was there, unspoken but real. It felt like we just belonged together. I guess that's what happens when you're little. You don't overthink things, you just feel them. But life has a funny way of pulling people apart. We both had our own lives, our own families, and when I was 10, my family moved away. My father got a job in another town and we left everything behind. I remember that feeling, sitting in the back seat of the car, looking out the window at Emily's house for the last time. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last time I'd see her for years. The years passed, and my memories of her faded but never completely disappeared. I'd see her face in the faces of other girls, and I'd hear her laugh in my dreams. But time was a tricky thing. I grew older and so did she. I finished school, found a job, and moved on with my life. And yet there was always this longing. This empty space inside me, like there was something I was missing but couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't until I came back to my hometown years later that I saw her again. I was back for a work assignment, just visiting family for a few days. I didn't expect much. Just a quick stop to check in with old friends and see the places I used to play. I was standing on the sidewalk outside of the old park, reminiscing when I heard that laugh. It was that laugh, that unmistakable sound that I hadn't heard in years. I turned around so fast my heart almost stopped. And there she was. Emily. She looked different, of course. We both did. But her eyes, those eyes, they were exactly how I remembered them. Full of light, full of curiosity, full of a spark I had never forgotten. And she saw me too. Her expression changed from a casual smile to something softer, warmer, like she recognized me too, even after all these years. "Jake?" she asked. Her voice tentative, unsure, but there was a trace of excitement there, like maybe she too had been waiting for this moment. "Emily?" I said, the name slipping out before I even realized it. I wasn't sure how to react, but it didn't matter. There she was, standing in front of me, and in that moment all the years between us melted away. We talked, awkward at first, fumbling through the years of separation. But soon enough it was as if we had never been apart. We laughed, we caught up on everything, our families, our lives, our memories of the old neighborhood. But beneath the surface there was something more. Something that had always been there, unspoken. Something that had been waiting all these years. We walked around the park together just like we used to, but this time it was different. The air was thicker, charged with something neither of us could deny. I could feel the pull, the connection. My heart was beating faster, and I could see the same look in her eyes, the same look I had always seen. Even when we were just kids, "I used to think about you all the time," she admitted, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. I stopped walking, my heart racing. "I thought about you too," I said, unsure if I was revealing too much, but I couldn't hold it back. "I always wondered what happened to you," she continued. "I never really let go of the idea that we'd see each other again." I couldn't believe it. All those years I'd been carrying this feeling of emptiness, thinking I was the only one. But here she was telling me she had felt the same way. We spent the next few hours walking around town, talking about everything and nothing. It was the most comfortable I'd felt in ages, like no time had passed. Like we were still those two kids running through the streets together. It was then that I realized something. That longing, that ache wasn't just nostalgia. It was love. A love that had been there all along, buried beneath the years, the distance and the time apart. And now that we were finally here, It felt like it had always been waiting for us to find it again. When we said goodbye that evening, I didn't want to let go. But there was a quiet understanding between us. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. She kissed me on the cheek, her lips soft and warm, and for the first time in my life, I felt complete. I knew that the love we had as kids had never really faded, and now it had come back to life, stronger than ever. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We saw each other every chance we got. We went on dates, walked through the same places we used to play, and talked about everything. But it wasn't just the nostalgia that drew us together. It was the way we fit. We fit in a way I had never fit with anyone else. And somewhere, in those quiet moments together, we realized that we were more than just two people rediscovering each other. We were two people who had been in love for as long as we could remember, even when we didn't know it. Our love had never gone anywhere. It had just been waiting for us to grow, to become the people we were meant to be before it could bloom. I guess sometimes love doesn't need to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just there, quietly growing in the background, waiting for the right moment to bloom. And when it does, it's like everything falls into place. Because sometimes love isn't just about finding the right person, it's about discovering that you've loved them all along, even before you knew it. And that's how I came to realize something simple, something profound. Emily and I had loved each other since childhood, and now we were finally getting the chance to live that love together. I never expected much from this trip. I had always been a bit of a loner, the kind of guy who preferred my own company, reading books or walking around quiet streets. But there was something about that invitation from my old friend Mark that pulled me in. "Come on, man. It'll be fun. A weekend away. Just let go for once," he had said. So reluctantly I agreed. The destination? A city far away from home. A place with a strange charm that I hadn't heard much about, just the buzz of a few locals and old stories. The moment we arrived, the city felt like another world. The architecture was beautiful. Old stone buildings, narrow winding streets, and those little cafes tucked into corners like secrets. I didn't have any big plans other than to enjoy the quiet, explore a little and relax. But then I saw her. She was sitting outside a cafe, sipping something hot, her face half hidden behind a book. Her hair was dark, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she looked so absorbed in her reading that she didn't notice me at first. I think that's what caught my attention. She wasn't looking at anyone. Wasn't worried about anything, just lost in the words on the page. Mark and I wandered in, and as we waited for our drinks, I caught her glancing up. Her eyes met mine for a split second, and I swear in that moment, the whole cafe faded away. Maybe it was just the randomness of it all, or the way she smiled before looking back down at her book. But something clicked in me right there. Mark, of course, didn't miss a beat. He elbowed me and muttered, "Go talk to her, man. She's beautiful." I shrugged him off. I'm just here to relax. But deep down, I couldn't shake the thought of her. So I did what I do best. I took a walk by myself through the city, letting my thoughts wander. That night, we went to a small bar in a quieter part of town. The music was soft, people talking in hushed voices, the air cool and crisp. And as fate would have it, she walked in just as I was nursing a drink. She didn't see me at first, but I noticed her immediately, her eyes scanning the room, her face lighting up as she found her friends. I knew it was probably ridiculous to feel this way, but I couldn't help myself. I wanted to talk to her. I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it would be to approach her, say something simple. "Hey, I saw you earlier. What's your name?" But I didn't. I stayed at my table, pretending to be absorbed in the glass in front of me. It wasn't until later in the evening, after a few more drinks and a lot more courage, that our paths crossed again. I was standing near the bar and she was walking by. This time I didn't hesitate. I stepped in her direction. "Hi," I said awkwardly, probably too blunt. She looked up surprised and smiled warmly. "Oh, hey, you were at that cafe earlier, right?" "Yeah, I noticed you." She raised an eyebrow but didn't look uncomfortable. "I noticed you too. It's not every day you see someone lost in their book like that. What were you reading?" Her question was the kind of thing that made me relax. I was used to people not caring about the little things I liked. But this felt different. I told her about the book I'd been reading, some obscure thing about art history, and she seemed genuinely interested. We talked for a few more minutes, exchanging little pieces about our lives, our favorite places, things that seemed so trivial, but at that moment they felt significant. As the night went on, we found ourselves drifting toward the same group of people, chatting about this and that, laughing more than I had in ages. By the time we both realized the bar was closing, and we were standing at the door together, not ready to say goodbye. "I should get going," she said, glancing around as if she didn't want to leave either. I couldn't let her go without asking, "Would you like to maybe get coffee sometime tomorrow?" She hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "I'd like that." The next day we met for that coffee, and from that moment, I found myself drawn to her more than I expected. Her name was Anna, and she was just as fascinating as I'd imagined. We spent the day wandering the city together, talking, laughing, getting lost in its winding streets, sharing stories about where we'd come from and where we were going. There was something so easy about being with her, as if we'd known each other for years, not just a few hours. We spent the weekend exploring more of the city, visiting old museums and trying new foods. She had this way of making everything seem exciting, even when we were just sitting on a park bench, talking about nothing in particular. I started to notice all the little things about her. The way her eyes sparkled when she laughed, the way she always made sure to check on how others were doing, her curiosity about everything, even the smallest details of life. It made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in so long. But the hardest part came when the weekend ended. I had to leave. We were both heading back to our separate cities, back to lives that felt a million miles apart. It seemed impossible that something so real could have formed in such a short time. But I couldn't deny it. I had fallen for her, and I had to tell her that. The night before I left, I sat with her on the rooftop of the hotel, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. She was quiet, looking out at the view, and I could sense the same sadness in her that I felt. "You know," I said, my voice low, "I didn't expect to meet anyone like you here." She turned to face me, her gaze steady. "Neither did I." "I'm going to miss this," I added, not knowing how to say what I really felt. She smiled, her lips soft. "Me too." There was a long pause. Then finally I said it. "Anna, I think I'm falling for you." She didn't look surprised. Instead, her expression softened and she took a step closer. "I think I might be falling for you too." We spent the next few weeks staying in touch, talking every day, texting, calling, planning trips to visit each other. Even though we were far apart, there was a bond that grew between us, stronger than I could have imagined. Our connection was something I hadn't ever felt before, a quiet, deep understanding. And that's the thing about love, it doesn't always make sense. It doesn't need grand gestures or moments of perfection. Sometimes it's just a conversation that starts in a cafe, a smile that feels real, and a connection that grows quietly, softly, until it's the most important thing in your life. And that's what she became to me, everything. All right, let me tell you how it all began. It's funny, actually. I never thought I'd meet someone like her. Not through a screen, anyway. But here we are, and I guess it's a bit of a modern love story. So it all started one night, when I was scrolling through social media, as most people do when they're bored. I didn't expect anything to come from it. I wasn't looking for love or anything serious, just mindless scrolling. But then something caught my eye, a post, a picture actually, of this girl who seemed so different. Not in an overly dramatic or forced way, but there was something about her. She wasn't trying to be perfect. She was just her. Her name was Ella. I don't even remember what the picture was about, but I clicked on her profile anyway. I think I was just curious, you know. I looked through her feed, and there was a lot of music she liked. A few random thoughts, some travel photos. But the most striking thing, her captions. Her words made me feel like I could hear her voice. It wasn't like the typical generic stuff people post to get likes. No, hers felt real, like I was reading her diary. So I took a chance. I messaged her. "Hey, I saw you're into photography. I just got a new camera, any tips?" It was simple, casual, maybe even a little cheesy. But she replied almost immediately. "Nice, yeah, I could give you some tips. What kind of stuff do you like to shoot?" And that's where it started, our first conversation. We talked about photography, then about music, and then about our favorite books and movies. She was so easy to talk to. And the thing is, she wasn't like most people I'd met before. There was no small talk, no filler. Every word we exchanged felt meaningful, even when we joked around. We spent weeks chatting like this, mostly through texts, voice notes here and there. But somehow, even through the phone screen, I could sense who she really was. She was funny, thoughtful, and had this genuine warmth about her. I liked that we could be open and just real with each other. There was no pressure, no pretenses. We talked about everything, our childhoods, our dreams, what we wanted from life. She shared things with me that I'm sure she hadn't told many people, and the more we talked, the more I found myself falling for her. I'm talking about the kind of feeling that sneaks up on you. That little twist in your chest when you hear their voice on the other side of a phone call. But the thing is, we both agreed we wanted to get to know each other better before meeting. I mean, we didn't want to rush into anything. We wanted to build something real, so we spent weeks like this, chatting, getting to know each other, but never meeting face to face. There was something exciting about the mystery of it all. I wondered what she'd be like in person, how her laugh would sound when I could actually hear it in the same room. Then one night it was like something clicked. We'd been texting, and I could tell something was different in the way she was talking. She sent me a message that just said, "I think I'm ready to meet you in person." I stared at my phone for what felt like an eternity. My heart raced. I mean, I had wanted this, but now that it was actually happening, I wasn't sure what to feel. Excitement? Nervousness? I didn't even know. I texted her back almost immediately. "Yeah, I'd love that. Let's make it happen." And so it was set. We planned the date. Nothing fancy, just coffee at a local cafe. It felt like one of those moments where you hope everything lives up to what you've imagined in your mind, but at the same time, you're terrified it won't. Because in the back of your mind, you know there's always the risk of disappointment. What if it didn't click in real life? What if the chemistry was only good over texts? The day finally came. I stood outside the cafe pacing. My heart was pounding. I was trying to calm myself down, but the nerves wouldn't go away. I saw her first. She was walking towards me, looking just like her pictures, but also somehow even more beautiful. Her smile when she saw me made everything feel instantly right. We hugged awkwardly at first, but then it felt natural. The kind of hug you give someone you've known forever, even though you've only just met. We went inside, got our coffees, and sat down. And you know what? It was effortless. Just like our conversations had been, sitting there with her felt like we were picking up where we left off. We talked and laughed, and I realized how much I already knew her. But at the same time, I was discovering so much more. She wasn't just the person I'd talked to online. She was someone even more incredible in real life. I could see the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her passions, and how her hands moved when she got excited. I noticed how she made me feel comfortable just by being herself. There was something magical about the way we connected, like it wasn't the first time we'd met. As the day went on, I found myself thinking, this is it. This is the kind of connection people talk about, but don't often find. This was the real thing. By the end of the day, I didn't want to say goodbye, but I had to. She had to get home, and I didn't want to rush things, so we said goodnight. And I remember watching her walk away, feeling like I'd just experienced something unforgettable. After that, things only got better. We saw each other more often, and with each meeting, I realized I was falling deeper for her. The best part? She was falling for me too. And we both knew it was just the beginning of something beautiful. Sometimes, I think about how it all started. Two strangers talking through a screen, getting to know each other piece by piece. It's crazy to think about, but that's the thing about love. You never know when or how it'll find you. All you can do is let it happen. Trust in the process, and take that leap when the time feels right. I still remember the first time I saw her. It wasn't some grand romantic moment. We were just two kids in the same small town, each with our own lives. But something about the way she smiled caught my attention. At the time, I thought it was just a passing thought. She was just another person in a crowd. But as time went on, she became something much more than that, someone much more important. We were friends long before anything else. She was the kind of person you could talk to about anything, whether it was schoolwork, a random thought, or even something personal. She would listen. She was always there, her laugh brightening the dullest of days. We shared jokes, secrets, and those awkward moments only close friends can understand. I didn't notice how deeply I cared for her until years had passed. When we were younger, it was always clear I cared for her, sure, but it was in a way I didn't quite recognize as love. It was like how a brother cares for a sister. but with a strange undertone, a softness that lingered when she wasn't around. She was everything I wanted in a friend, smart, funny, compassionate, but I didn't know that I wanted her as something more. It wasn't until the day I saw her with someone else that I started to realize something had changed. We were walking through the park together, like we always did when I saw her talking to a guy. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I saw the way she looked at him. Her eyes sparkled in a way they never had when she was with me. I couldn't help but feel a tight knot in my chest, a mix of confusion and jealousy. Why did it bother me so much? It was then I realized that I had always thought of her as more than just a friend, but I had never let myself face it. I never let myself admit that I wanted her to look at me that way, to smile at me with that same sparkle in her eyes. I wasn't just her best friend. I was falling for her. From that point on, everything felt different. Every little thing she did seemed to catch my attention. The way her eyes would light up when she talked about something she loved. The way her voice would get excited when she shared a funny story. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wanted to be the one who made her smile that way. I wanted to be the one who made her laugh, the one who held her hand. But I was scared. Scared of ruining everything we had. I didn't want to risk the friendship we built over the years. I didn't want to make things awkward, to change the dynamic between us. For so long we had been each other's safe place. What if I confessed and she didn't feel the same way? What if it all crumbled? But as time passed, the fear began to fade. It was hard to ignore how my feelings for her kept growing stronger. I couldn't keep pretending that she was just my friend. The truth was I loved her, and it was becoming impossible to keep that hidden. One night, after a long day of studying together, we sat outside watching the stars. The air was cool and there was something peaceful about the quiet, the way everything seemed to slow down. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. When I finally turned to her, she was looking up at the sky, lost in thought, and I couldn't help but admire how beautiful she was. "Do you ever think about the future?" I asked, my voice betraying the nerves I felt. She glanced over at me and I could see the curiosity in her eyes. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, but I had to say it. "I mean, do you ever think about who you'll be with? Who you'll marry?" She looked at me more intently, a soft smile on her lips. "Of course I think about it. But you know, it's not something I worry about. I believe that when the time is right, things will fall into place." It was like she didn't understand the weight of the question, and maybe that was my fault for not saying it clearly enough. I took a deep breath and finally said it. "What if the time is now?" She blinked in surprise, and I knew instantly that she understood what I meant. I was giving her the most vulnerable part of myself, opening up to a fear that had plagued me for so long. "I don't want to risk losing you," I said quietly. "But I can't pretend anymore. I love you, and I've loved you for a long time. It's not just friendship for me. And I'm wondering if you feel the same way." She stared at me for a long moment, her face unreadable. My heart was racing, the silence between us almost unbearable. Finally, she reached over, took my hand in hers, and gave me a soft, reassuring smile. "I've always known," she said. "I just didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to lose you either." And in that moment, everything clicked. The years of friendship, the late-night conversations, the laughter, the tears, it had all led to this. We weren't just friends anymore. We were something more. From that night on, we were inseparable. We spent the next few months together, discovering what it meant to be more than friends, and it felt right in a way I never expected. It wasn't always easy. There were challenges, and sometimes we questioned whether we were doing the right thing, but it was always worth it. Every time I saw her, I couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder. She was mine, and I was hers. After a while, the conversation turned to marriage. It felt like the natural next step. Our love wasn't just a passing feeling. It was built on years of understanding and respect, and that foundation made everything else seem clear. When I asked her to marry me, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't a grand, dramatic proposal. It was simple, just us sitting together talking about our future. "Will you marry me?" I asked, my heart in my throat. She looked at me, her eyes soft, and answered with a smile that made my heart soar. Yes, I will." And just like that, the young man who had once been afraid of losing his best friend had become the man who was about to marry the woman of his dreams. Years later, when we talk about those days, she laughs and says, "I always knew it was you." And I'll never forget the look in her eyes. The way she said it with so much certainty, as if all the years of friendship had already been leading to this moment. And now, standing beside her, I know that everything I ever dreamed of was always within reach. All it took was realizing that what we had was more than friendship. It was love. And that's how we found each other. In a world where love isn't just a feeling, but a story built from years of laughter, shared moments, and the courage to finally say, "I love you." That's the love story from the perspective of the young man, how his feelings evolved over time, and how their bond grew stronger until they found the courage to be together. It all started like any normal day at the office. I didn't expect anything to change, not at first. I was just doing my usual routine, getting in early, grabbing a coffee and diving into work. But then she walked in. I remember the first time I saw her. She had this kind of quiet presence, like she was new to the whole office but already comfortable in her own skin. Her name was Lily. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was a new hire in the marketing department, and we worked in different teams. She seemed friendly, but she didn't really stand out to me, at least not immediately. That is, until we started collaborating on a project. It wasn't a huge project, but I had to work with her on a few things. I'll be honest, I didn't expect much, but something clicked during that first meeting. She had this way of looking at problems, clear, precise, and thoughtful. It was refreshing. She wasn't like everyone else, who often went for the quick solution, or worse, avoided making a decision altogether. No, Lily really took the time to think things through, and I admired that. We started talking more outside of work hours. It wasn't anything formal, just casual conversations about everything, music, movies, travel. It was easy to talk to her, and I found myself looking forward to our chats, whether it was during lunch breaks or at the end of a long workday. In those early days, I didn't think it was anything more than friendship. I mean, she was just someone I enjoyed talking to, someone who made the day a little less dull, but I began noticing things, little things. The way she laughed at my terrible jokes, how she always remembered small details about my life, like the fact that I liked dark roast coffee or that I'd been reading a book on philosophy. I started to realize that I was thinking about her outside of work. Then came the moment when I first started feeling something more. It was a Friday afternoon and we were working late on a presentation for a client. Everyone else had already left and it was just the two of us in the office. The building was quiet and it felt like time had slowed down. I was packing up to leave, but I turned to find her still working, furrowing her brow over the presentation slide. There was something about the way she was so focused, so immersed in what she was doing. I don't know why, but it hit me then. I liked her. I didn't just enjoy her company or appreciate her intellect. I actually cared about her. I remember I tried to play it cool. I didn't want to seem too eager, so I just asked her if she wanted to grab a coffee or something before heading home. She agreed without hesitation, and we ended up talking for hours. That night, we didn't talk about work at all. It was all personal stuff, our families, our childhoods, our dreams for the future. It felt like we were peeling back layers, getting to know the real people behind the professional facades. From then on, things changed. I started finding excuses to spend more time with her. We'd walk to the subway together after work or grab lunch when the day was slow. I found myself going out of my way to help her with anything, even if it wasn't part of our job. And every time she smiled or laughed at one of my awkward comments, I felt something stir in me. I began to look forward to seeing her every day, but I didn't act on it. I didn't want to risk our friendship. I didn't want to mess things up by confessing how I felt. I convinced myself that I was just being foolish, that it was a silly crush and that it would pass. But it didn't. It only grew stronger. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a company event, just a casual mixer, nothing too fancy. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to go, but I thought it might be nice to have a chance to relax and talk without the pressure of deadlines looming over us. I didn't expect to spend the night talking to her, but I did. She was wearing this dress that made her look even more beautiful than I'd ever noticed. As the night wore on, I started to get lost in our conversation again. She had this way of making everything feel easy. We talked about everything, our hopes, fears, even our worst mistakes. By the time the event ended, I realized I didn't want the night to be over. And that's when I decided I had to tell her. I had to let her know how I felt. I found her standing by the door, looking out at the night sky. Without thinking, I walked up to her. took a deep breath, and said, "Lily, I need to tell you something." She looked at me, her eyes soft and curious. "I don't know when it happened," I continued, "but somewhere along the way, I started falling for you, not just as a friend, but in a way that I can't ignore anymore." She stood there for a moment, silent. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt like an idiot. But then she smiled. It was the kind of smile that made everything feel right. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said quietly. From that moment on, everything changed, but in the best way possible. We didn't rush into anything. We took our time, making sure we were on the same page. But there was no denying what was happening between us. We had moved beyond friendship, and we were both ready for whatever came next. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, times when work got stressful, and we had to navigate how to balance our professional lives with our personal feelings. But through it all, we grew even closer. We were no longer just colleagues, no longer just friends, but we were partners in every sense of the word. And now, when I look back at everything, from the day she walked into the office to the quiet moments we shared, to the day I finally told her how I felt, I can't help but feel grateful. I never imagined that something as simple as working together could lead to something so profound. But here we are, and I wouldn't change a thing. In the end, love isn't something you plan. It sneaks up on you just like friendship did. And I guess maybe that's the best kind of love. The kind that starts as something small, grows over time, and turns into something beautiful.